Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich. I'm
And
what?
Ginny, what's that?
How did I say my name?
I don't know.
I think about it.
And usually it's me screwing up the opening here. I think we're going to keep this
Man.
in, though, just so people understand that Ginny is not
It's not
perfect.
just you.
I am not the only one who flubs things. Ginny does too. I didn't even hear it because I wasn't even
Just
listening
my own
because
name.
I was trying to think of my witty opening.
Your
And so
witty
now I can
opening.
blame you for not having a particularly
You're
witty
welcome.
one.
You're
I was
welcome.
just going to say I was going to request your proposal for how we should move forward with the show going forward. That wasn't a great one, though, but that's because you threw me off
Sorry.
and interrupted my thought process. So,
Okay, I'm good.
in
now.
any case, she is Ginny Dietrich. I'm Chip Griffin. This is the Agency Leadership Podcast. And if you're surprised by anything that's happened in these first 30 seconds, you haven't been listening to this show for very long. Welcome.
Right. Welcome.
So today we are going to talk about RFPs, and we're going to take a little bit of a different angle on it because normally when we talk about RFPs, we're sitting here pounding our fists on the table, desk, wherever we're at, saying, stay away, don't do them, avoid RFPs at all costs. But we always include, because we always say it depends at the end of every show, we include an asterisk, which is sometimes they're unavoidable. And the primary times that RFPs are unavoidable for agencies are, one, if you've got an existing client that wants to renew with you but is putting the process out to an RFP, if you want the business to stay with you, you're going to have to participate. You don't just get to say, nope, sorry, peace out. Chip and Jane told me not to do this. So I'm either going to let you go or you're going to have to keep me without making me go through the RFP.
Without the
process.
RFP, yeah.
Because most clients don't care what Chip and Ginny have to say. So
no, they don't.
You're out of luck.
Unfortunately.
And the second is there are some industries where it's just so standard to do RFPs that trying to convince, travel and tourism, for example, most travel and tourism boards do RFPs. And so if you are an agency that specializes in that, you probably don't have any choice because like many government or quasi-governmental organizations, they love the RFP process and it's very difficult to avoid. So if that's your specialty, you got to play. So if you meet one of these exceptions and you are absolutely compelled to participate in our RFP process, how can you make the best of it, Ginny?
First off, I really
or at least avoid the worst.
Yeah, fair. I love it when somebody will say, so I was listening to the Agency Leadership Podcast and you and Chip said we shouldn't participate in RFPs, but I do a lot of government work and I'm not sure how to get out of it. And I'm always like, it depends. That's our asterisk. I would love it if we didn't have to do RFPs because I think that as an industry, they're not useful at all. But yes, there are going to be some, and I have some clients who that's all they do is government work, so they have to do RFPs. But to your point, there are some things that you can do to make it easier, and one of those things is to, for lack of a better term, templatize some of the work. So every single RFP usually asks for the same things about the agency, about your team. Sometimes they ask for financials. The things that are standard in almost every RFP, you can templatize that. You don't have to recreate it every time. And I think I see a lot of people, a lot of agency owners try to recreate all of those things every single time, which adds to the time that they are investing in the RFP. You don't need to do that. You can absolutely standardize your response to all of the standard questions.
Absolutely. I mean, there is so much repetitive junk in RFPs that you should be able to reuse a significant portion. And I think in general, when you are compelled to respond to an RFP, you should make it as little burden on you and your team as possible. You should not be creating a lot of original content for the RFP, even when it looks like maybe that's what they want. Sometimes you just need to say, look, I'm drawing the line. I'm not, because some of these RFPs, they're insane with the things that they ask for.
Yeah.
And the reality is that a lot of it isn't even going to be used in the decision-making process. It's just,
right.
Some person is sitting down and they've either copied and pasted from something else that they found, or they've surveyed their internal team and said, what are all the things we would like? And so you basically, when I was a kid, you'd take the Sears catalog and you'd go through it and build your Christmas list with all of the things that you wanted. It was this like monstrously long thing with all sorts of crazy, stupid things that Even if I ever got them, I wouldn't use them more than once because they were just
Right. Right.
novelties.
Sure.
That's what a lot of RFPs are. They are just giant wish lists. And so you shouldn't fall into the trap of saying, well, I'm only going to win this if I respond in original detail to every single question.
Right.
Because you're not. That's not how they're making
Yep.
their decision. You need to provide enough information to keep moving through the process. But really, responding to that RFP, your only goal is to get to the next conversation.
Right.
You don't win it on the RFP alone.
Yeah, because you're going to have to do the dog and pony show and all that kind of stuff, and that's typically where you win it because that's the chemistry check. I think the other place that agencies tend to fall into a trap is where they'll give you an example and say create new copy, new creative, new whatever. Like we want to see your thinking, and I think we tend to fall in the trap of, oh my gosh, we have to create a whole campaign for this, and you don't. Like you can definitely speak to your past experience. You can showcase examples from past experience that relates to what they're saying, but you don't necessarily have to create new for that either. You don't have to create new creative. You don't have to invest a bunch of time in design and copy and all those kinds of things. You can definitely use stuff that already exists and say, when we did this for client X, this is how we handled it. And this is what it looked like, so that they can see the work, but that you're not necessarily giving them a bunch of ideas for free.
Right. I mean, that's a great suggestion, where you say, my thought would be something like this. Right. So you kind of illustrate it. You can say a few things in your commentary to tie it back to what their particular challenges. But the reality is most of these RFPs don't give a lot of useful information for you to work from anyway. So you're really just flying blind in any case. And so, spending a lot of time and money on this doesn't make a lot of sense at that stage. And frankly, I've seen a lot of even small agencies spend in the tens of thousands of dollars in labor and materials and research and all that in order to respond to a single RFP. And that's bonkers. Right? You need to find a way to do it much more efficiently if you are someone who is going to have to respond. The other thing I would say is you need to start by asking questions. And so you need to get some basic questions answered before you decide if you're even going to participate. And this goes for even if it's an account that you already have. Even if it's an account that you already have, you have to ask questions like, how many people are you sending this RFP request to? Right? I mean, have you sent this out to hundreds of agencies and are just waiting to see who responds? Have you sent it to 5 people because you pre-screened them? Makes a big difference. If you're one of 5 that have been pre-screened, it may be worth putting in a little bit of extra effort. You have to ask, is the incumbent part of this process, or is there an incumbent? Because if there is an incumbent and you're not it, you need to ask yourself really that deep question, do I really need to respond to this? Do I really have enough chance? Or if I do, maybe I don't fully half-ass it, but I kind of, phone it in a little bit. And I just kind of, give the very basic, very copy and paste, send something in and see, do I get lucky and move to the next phase of the process? Because if there is an incumbent and you're not it, your odds are very low. Unless they tell you, the incumbent is someone we're definitely moving on from. Although even then I wouldn't fully trust them when they say things like that, because sometimes they're just trying to lure you in, because a lot of times procurement just tells them they need to get a certain number of responses before they can move ahead. And so they will tell agencies pretty much anything just to get the document in hand. If you're going to be one of those people, don't put a lot of effort into it, at least. Save yourself some time.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, which is excellent, that if there's an incumbent agency, usually the reason they're doing it is because there's a time period that they have. Like we've been with the agency for 2 years, for instance, or we had a 5-year contract and now we have to put it out to bid again, and we have to get 3 to 5 RFP responses. So usually the incumbent agency is always going to get the business, especially because the marketing and communications teams don't want to upset the apple cart and everything's working and relationships and all those kinds of things. And procurement is the one that has to go out and do this. So there's that. To your point, if there's an incumbent and they say the incumbent's being fired, or the incumbent is no longer working with us, or something like that, then I think you have a better chance. But yeah, usually when there's an incumbent also participating, it's because procurement is required to go out after a certain number of years to get bids again, just to keep things fresh and make sure pricing is correct and all those kinds of things.
Right. And we're not saying that the incumbent always wins, but they certainly have an edge because they have the
Yep.
relationships. They know the client. When they're responding to the RFP, they get to respond with a whole lot more knowledge than every other
Yep.
participant.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, knowing if they're involved is vitally important. I think the other thing from a question standpoint is most RFPs have some sort of a question process where
Right.
you either submit questions in writing or they do a Zoom call where, prospective vendors can come in and ask questions. Then take advantage of whatever opportunity you're given to ask questions before you put in a lot of work, because this can help you to refine your answers. It can help you. You can ask things like, what are you looking to change from what you've done before? Or what do you think has worked and what hasn't? A lot of times they won't give you a lot of detailed
Mhm.
information, but it doesn't hurt to ask, right? At
Yeah.
least try to pull something out of them. And if you're going through and you look at the RFP and you're like, there are some of these things that would require monstrous amounts of work, ask if that's really what they intend, because a lot of times they're not even thinking about it. And if you say, well, this, putting together this plan would be a 12-hour process, and they'll say, oh, no, we're not expecting that, we're just looking for off the top. Now sometimes they may again be fudging, but at least
Sure.
ask some of those questions and get clarifications. Don't make assumptions, particularly if your assumption is going to require a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked about this in the past as well, but in any new business meeting, when you go in with a prospect and you ask really thoughtful questions and you're curious about their responses and the response creates a deeper set of questions, like you're having a conversation where you're curious and you're asking a lot of questions, the prospect leaves that meeting always thinking, wow, that agency is really smart, or wow, I really like the way that they think. And all you do is ask questions. And the same thing goes in the RFP process. If you're asking really insightful questions and you're digging deep, you want them to leave with that feeling of, oh, I really hope these guys respond to RFP because I like the way that they think. I think they're really smart. And you give them that opportunity to start to think that way before you even submit the RFP. And it's like I said earlier, it's about the chemistry, it's about building the relationship. And that's one way to do it really quickly off the bat to at least get you to the next level.
Absolutely. And the chemistry is so important. So, if you don't have any relationship at all going in with anybody with the account, I mean, that to me, that's a red flag, and suggests that that's probably not, if you've never had a conversation with them at all, ever, your odds are going to be pretty low. But let's assume that that's the case. You can try, not all RFP processes prevent actual conversations with someone at the client. A lot of them do. A lot of them will say, only questions submitted in writing will be,
Sure. Yep.
but it doesn't hurt. If it doesn't prohibit it, it doesn't hurt to try to have some
Yep.
kind of a conversation with somebody on the client side who might be able to give you some more color, some more information, and also to build that chemistry. Even if you do have a prohibition in place and you can't do that, guess what? Those folks are on places like LinkedIn. You can start building relationships by commenting on their posts, liking their stuff, reposting it. You don't have
Yep.
to do it in
Yep.
an obvious, hey, looking forward to seeing, how we do in the RFP process, but just, kind of doing things that get you on their radar screen in other ways can be productive, particularly because a lot of the folks at the client who are part of the process may not even know who the RFP has been sent to. So
Right.
they won't even see it as you trying to curry favor. They just see it as your name is out there. And oh, by the way, now when they see the RFPs and they're reviewing it in their little committee meeting, they're like, oh, I just talked to Chip on LinkedIn the other day. I just saw
Yep.
him do this or that. Right.
Yep.
So
Yep.
find ways
Yep.
to
Such
manufacture
good
that
advice.
chemistry within the bounds of whatever the restrictions might be.
That's such good advice. And I think that goes across the board in general. Like that's some advice I always give to college graduates is find the places that you want to work and start commenting on their content. It works for media relations too, journalists and influencers. So that's such good advice. Let's switch gears though and talk about if you're the incumbent and you fear that the RFP has gone out because you're about to be fired. How do you handle that?
Well, I think you need to take an honest look at the relationship and ask yourself, is it over? Right. I
Yep.
mean, are they, because there are certainly times where, as the agency, you're done, right?
Yeah.
That they've basically made the decision that they're moving on. They've got a new CMO. They've got, business has gone bad. I mean, there's some relationship issue, who knows, whatever it is. There are times where you just see the handwriting on the wall. So you have to ask yourself, is it even worth participating? Should I even go down this path? Because if you know it's gone, why are you wasting the time on it? Why not spend that time
Right.
pursuing other business that is more likely to land? Now, I will say most of the time it's not that clear. And most of the time the client is playing their cards close enough and giving you just enough hope that even if they've kind of made up the mind to let you go, they're not going to fully rule it out. Because honestly, they may not be able to find that, greener pasture out there. They may not find someone who is promising them the sun, the moon, and the stars for a lot less money that they think they can find.
Right.
So in general, it's worth continuing to pursue it. But at the same time, I would look at the RFP, if I'm the incumbent, more as my general planning process for that client. And so just as in that general planning process, I'm not going to create all sorts of brand new spec ideas and that kind of stuff. I'm going to lay out, here's the roadmap. I would take the same approach to the RFP. But keep in mind, you've got a huge advantage because you know what's worked, you know what hasn't, you know what the client's tastes are.
Right. Yep.
It ought to be a heck of a lot easier for you to respond to that RFP than anyone else. So don't make it more difficult than it is.
Yeah. And I would say, to your point, my husband went through an RFP process with an agency that they use late last year, and it was actually fascinating from my standpoint to watch the incumbent agency and how they behaved. And he was honest with them. He said, "Listen, I can't afford to keep paying you at this level. I'm willing to take the scope back a little bit and reel it back, but this is what we're looking for 2024." And he outlined it really specifically. From my perspective, I was like, every agency wants a client like this, because he outlined specifically what they were looking for and what the budget was that they had to spend. And the incumbent agency was like, "You're never going to find it. It's not going to do it, and we can't do it." And like the amount of combativeness and defensiveness that the agency showed, like, he was willing to continue working with them if they could scale back the budget and the scope. But instead, they went on the defensive and they were really rude and combative. And he was like, "I don't want to work with you guys anymore because you just ruined it," right? So you have to think about that too. Like, I always say that when somebody leaves your organization, they're remembered by how they left, by how they behaved when they left, not all of the great work that they did while they were with you. And the same thing with the agency. Don't burn bridges. If you feel like the relationship is over or you can't meet their demands or whatever it happens to be, don't burn the bridge. Please do not burn the bridge, because that's going to come back and bite you tenfold.
Yeah, it's a relationship that you've had. There's no reason to set it on fire 99.9% of the time. And even that 0.1%, I probably still wouldn't do it, because who knows what's going to happen in the future. They may fully deserve it or whatever. But, so you need to be having these conversations if you're the incumbent, so you know where you stand. You should not, even if they say to you, by the way, on the flip side, we're definitely keeping you, procurement's just making us do this. Don't accept that either, right?
Yep.
Understand that anytime you're going through an RFP process, even if you're the incumbent, even if the client says, we're happy with you, you are at risk. It's sort of like if you're engaged and your fiance says, "Well, I'm going to go out, cruising the bars tonight, just for fun, just to kind of see what's out there, but don't worry, I'm coming home at the end of the night to you. Don't worry, it's fine." Right? That's a risk. It's the same. Because that's what it is. Right? They're saying, and they may believe it, that the relationship with the agency is great. But now they're going out and talking to all these other agencies, many of whom are going to over-deliver and provide all sorts of promises and great ideas and cool-looking graphics and, and they're going to sit there and say, "Oh, I could have that. Do I want that? Maybe I want that.
Maybe I want that." Oh, the agency we're with right now, they don't do that. It kind of drives me crazy.
So,
you're definitely at risk.
You got to be honest with yourself. And so if you were the incumbent, you're going to an RFP, don't get too high, don't get too low, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, totally.
And by the way, you should always be looking for other business anyway.
Yes, you should. Your pipeline should be full no matter what. It doesn't matter how long the contract is, how many years you have it, how many years you think you're going to have it after that. You should have your pipeline full all the time.
So bottom line is avoid RFPs if you can, but we understand that there are times when you can't. Hopefully we've given you some decent tips on how to make that process as
Definitely will never forget that example.
well, there you go. I mean, you gotta find ways to relate to people, and that's what I do. I'm a people person, Jenny. That's what people think of me as, for sure. But try to minimize the amount of work, maximize your odds of success, pick the right ones, invest your time wisely, and then if you have to participate in those RFPs, you'll hopefully win more often than you lose, or at least it'll all come out positively once you add up all the numbers and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
be smart.
I still think generally RFPs are bad, but you're right. There are some industries
Absolutely.
where it can't be helped.
If you gave me no information at all and you just said, I've been asked to do an RFP, I would say, don't do it. Kind of
Don't
like
do
if
it.
you asked
Yep.
me how, is your pricing good? I'll say, no, you need to increase it. Right? With no
Yes,
other information,
yes.
those are going to be my
Yes.
answers. Obviously,
Yes.
information can change things because, as we always say, it depends. So that's how we will draw this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast to a close. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it really does depend.